Okay, so now we need to fill in the top part, and then we're going to skip influences on government because we haven't learned that yet, and we're going to fill out the bottom of page 11. So let me increase my text size again. All right, so the first thing is who's the founder of Connecticut? So we have Thomas Hooker. He's the founder of Connecticut. And if you watch the last video, something you can remember is that if you have hooks, your hooks can connect to something else or it can connect to another hook. So hooks connect. Now, Thomas Hooker was actually, he left Massachusetts because he disagreed with the way the government was run. You had to be a church member in order to vote or in order to like have office. So there was no separation of church and state. And so he wanted to expand voting rights outside church membership. That was important to him. And so he wrote a document called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. And the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut is technically the very first constitution written in America, but it was written for just Connecticut. So Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. And it's going to explain like that you don't have to be a church member in order to vote. Uh-oh, get rid of that. Let's turn that thing off. Okay. Fundamental Orders of Connecticut's what he wrote. Then we have this guy over here for Rhode Island, and we're going to put Roger Williams. Roger Williams was banished because he spoke out against the church in Massachusetts, and he said that there should be a separation of church and state. And because he said that, they kicked him out. They didn't want anybody that disagreed with them in Massachusetts. Like, people moved to Massachusetts for religious freedom, but people were denied religious freedom if you weren't a Puritan living in Massachusetts. So he wanted a separation of church and state, which is very similar to Thomas Hooker. They kind of have the same ideas of the church should not and government should be separated. Then I have this lady right here. This is Anne Hutchinson. And Anne Hutchinson was kicked out of Massachusetts because she had a Bible study in her home. And that sounds like it was Massachusetts is a very religious place. So why would they kick her out for that? Well, in Massachusetts, they wanted the preachers to be the only people interpreting the Bible and explaining the Bible. And Anne Hutchinson was a woman, and she's inviting many people to her house to discuss the Bible. And because she's a woman leading this, that's another like big no-no against her. And the Puritans, they were so strict that when you went to church, men and women sat on opposite sides of the church. So Anne Hutchinson is inviting men and women to come to her Bible study in her home, which is very risque for the Puritan society. So she went to court and she defended herself, and she said that she felt like God wanted her to do this. And the Puritans did not believe that God spoke directly to you. So because she says this, she's also just making her case worse for herself. So she gets kicked out also of Massachusetts, and she goes to Rhode Island. Rhode Island. All right, this guy right here, look at his picture. He looks kind of like the Quaker Oats guy, doesn't he? Well, that's because it's William Penn. And he's the founder of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania means Penn's Woods. And he is a Quaker. That was a religious group. So think of Quaker Oats. William Penn, his religion is he's a Quaker. And he comes to the New World to practice religion freely. And the Quakers they were not well liked in England. They were seen kind of as like a weird cultish group. They had very liberal views for the time period. They believed women and men were equals. When William Penn arrived, he didn't just take Native American land, he actually paid for it. He felt like the Native Americans should be treated fairly. And they were the first to really speak out against slavery. Like, they didn't believe in slavery. So William Penn and the Quakers were very peaceful people. They would be what we would call pacifists. Like, they were anti-war and just wanted everyone to be treated equally and fairly. So we're going to put, so he came for religious freedom. That's what we're going to put where it says for. But the middle colonies, which is where Pennsylvania is located, they are known as the breadbasket of the colonies because they grew so much grain and then converted it to bread. So Quaker oats would be one of those grains. So that should help you make the connection. Like Quakers, oats, that's middle colonies. William Penn, he's on the container, and he's the founder of Pennsylvania. All right, so we're going to skip influences on government, and we're just going to do the bottom. So why were the following colonies established? Political, economic, or religious? So first we have Pennsylvania, which we just finished with, and we're going to say Pennsylvania was founded for religious reasons, and we're going to put the Quakers right next to it. Then we're going to do Maryland, and the Catholics went to Maryland, so we're going to put religious, Catholics. Now, Georgia is the only colony founded for a social reason, and that's because the jails were crowded and the debtors were taking up too much space. So the people who owed money that were debtors came to Georgia. Massachusetts was also founded for religious reasons. And you have the Pilgrims, who was the first group to come to Massachusetts, and then about 10 years later you have the Puritans arrive, and eventually these groups just merged, and the Puritan religion ended up being the religion for Massachusetts. Then we have Rhode Island. So Rhode Island is both political and religious because they want a separation of church and state. I can't type. I'm going to probably shrink the size of that. There we go. Oops. There we go. And then Virginia was economic. I want you to remember how they came looking for gold. They didn't find it, but then they ended up growing cash crops. So they ended up growing tobacco, and so it ended up being successful economically. All right, so that's all that we're going to fill out for our BAE pages, pages 10 and 11. We will go back and we will fill in the rest at a later date.